Good morning, everyone. Hello again. On behalf of His Excellency Mohammed Al-Gargawi, the Minister of Cabinet Affairs and the Managing Director of the Dubai Future Foundation, and our CEO, His Excellency Saif Al-Alili, I'd like to welcome you once again to our newest project, the Dubai Future Accelerator Space, where we partner with our other departments in government and innovative technology companies to work together for 90 days to develop pilot projects and prototypes exploring the future. And it is very much in the spirit of this exact kind of collaboration, as Dr. Aisha and Mo mentioned. So I am with the Dubai Future Foundation, and our job is to sit as a sort of think and do tank in the center of government, at the Dubai level of government, and to try to understand how the 21st century is unfolding and what we as Dubai can do about it. The truth is we're facing a number of extremely severe, you could even say existential challenges, not just here in Dubai, but globally. This is everything from climate change to resource and food stress to really the functional end of the 20th century and the institutions and social contracts and business models and governance contracts that have governed our lives as long as we've known it, that is more or less breaking all around us. And yet the 21st century is still being born. Nobody really knows what it's going to look like. Nobody really understands what is going to be good and bad and what's going to be effective and ineffective. So our job within the Future Foundation is to work with partners such as Dr. Aisha's office and many others to try to understand these big challenges and start to place some big bets about the systems transformations necessary to not only survive the next decade, but actually position Dubai and the UAE and the region and hopefully contribute to the global story around what a successful 21st century looks like. So we've done a variety of initiatives. For example, the 3D printed office downstairs. I would love to welcome you all into the world's first and only fully functional 3D printed building. It's just in front of Emirates Towers. That's our temporary headquarters, whilst the permanent headquarters are being built, the Museum of the Future, which is just in front of Emirates Towers. Part of that was working with the Dubai municipality to create the Dubai 3D printing strategy, which commits the city to 25% of all building permits will have 3D printing components, and then by the year 2030, starting from next year. Same is true with our partners in the Roads Transport Authority, where we're exploring autonomous transport and the impact of autonomous transport and new forms of mobility markets on the world today, and what does that mean for the city going forward future. And working with them and their excellent team developed a strategy to commit the city to 25% autonomous trips by 2030, which I think we're going to hit much, much faster than that given the rate of development. This space itself, you're in it here, little inception moment. Right? This is right here. This is brand new, less than 3 weeks old. It's the first cycle of what's going to be a multi-year program where we work with different departments, Dr. Aisha's office, KHDA, the Dubai Police, Dubai Municipality, Roads Transport Authority, Electricity and Water Authority, etc. And together we define what are the transformational challenges facing their sector going forward. What does the school of the future look like? What does the city government of the future look like? What does the electrical grid of the future look like? And then we work with companies from around the world, be they big, be they small, who have an innovative technology or business model or plan to try and test them out, right? No big commitments, just small-scale pilot projects to explore how this emerging technology might actually help us fulfill our transformational goals in the 21st century. And that's really important because a lot of the technology companies which you see in this room around you, I urge you afterwards to go and introduce yourselves. A lot of the transformative technologies are moving much, much faster than regulation and, let's say, public sector courage to test those out. And the fact of the matter is we're all really running out of time. So we have to try to partner with these companies and try to step boldly into the opportunities they present through programs like this. But the one I really want to talk to you about today is the Global Blockchain Council. As Her Excellency mentioned, this is something which we started to explore around 8 months ago. And it has grown to be, rapidly grown to be the largest multi-member, multi-jurisdictional coalition of its type in the world. It has currently over 46 members from all of the key regulators in Dubai, all of the key financial institutions, all of the key free zones and state-owned entities, many of the most important international multinational technology companies, as well as many of the most important startups and innovators in the fields of blockchain and related distributed ledger technologies. And the purpose of this was really to help get everybody around the table and understand what is this thing that we keep hearing about? What is blockchain? What does it mean for us? And who are we, right? If you're the Department of Economic Development, it might mean one thing for you. If you're the Dubai International Financial Center, it might mean something else than if you're a bank, for example. So trying to get all of the players in the ecosystem together in a room and develop a common language and, really importantly, a common sense of trust and social capital around what we all understand the opportunity and technology to be, and then what we might be able to do with that technology. So in the spirit of experimentation and prototyping, we've launched 18 pilot projects that have been committed. Only about 7 of those are public. Many of those are going to be announced in the next few weeks around GITEX and then shortly thereafter. So you'll start to see some of the fruits of the labor of the last few months of our pilot project partners. And really the most important and exciting component of this from our perspective was in the collaboration that came out of the Smart Dubai office and the very bold initiative that we took to develop the Dubai blockchain strategy, which really came from the needs of our members. The conversations around, great, it's amazing, we all get this understanding, we have this sense for what we might be able to do with blockchain today and tomorrow, but what's the roadmap? How is this going to fit into the bigger picture? There's different technology standards, there's different kinds of vendors, there's different ways of applying this in strong and weak forms. And so working with Her Excellency's office, we developed the blockchain strategy, which I'd like to share a little bit of information with you about. Let me give you an example that will ease us into that, though. So when I first moved to Dubai just over 7 years ago now, one of the processes that you have to do when you get a job anywhere, if you're from Dubai or if you're from the region or globally, so you have to get your degree certified. So that's like your actual piece of paper that you got from wherever you graduated, if undergraduate, master's, PhD, wherever that is, right? And there's a list of institutions that are sort of pre-certified in the UAE. And unfortunately, my university wasn't on that list because it was an institute. It was actually the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, but it wasn't the one that was on one of the approved lists. So what I had to do is I had to take my actual degree. I was living in London at the time, and I had to take that to a government department in the UK. They had to certify it because it was on their list. Luckily, it was on their list. Otherwise, I would have had to have shipped it back to the United States. So it was on the UK government's list of approved institutions. They certified it. I then took it to the UAE embassy in London after it had been certified by the UK government. They then certified it. I then had to bring the hard copy here to our HR department. They then certified it. They then sent that on to the Ministry of Interior, who then certified it, who then sent it on to another department, who then issued my labor visa, and so on. So this whole process took like 6 weeks, optimistically, right? The same is true for anything like it. And then I wanted to get a house. So I finally got my employment contract. I got my labor visa. So I had to actually get my actual contract, a hard copy of my actual contract. I then had to get a separate letter called a salary certificate saying that I was actually making the amount of money in my contract that it said. I then had to take that to the bank and get a checkbook and take my checkbook to the landlord. And with that, he gave me a draft lease because he didn't sign it. I signed it first. And then I had to wait a few more weeks until he'd signed it. And I took that to the department where we got something called your ijari, which is your certification of your lease. And then with that, I was able to get a DIWA bill and a phone service and all that stuff. Optimistically, that took about 4 weeks, right? If you add all that stuff up there, and this is just for one person kind of entering the system, even when you're in the system on a day-to-day basis, there's a tremendous amount of paperwork and duplication required. And we did the math around this, and it equates in 1 year, we generate 100 million pages of documents, right? That's about 3.5 documents every second, 3.5 pages of documents every second. So I've probably been talking for like, 4 or 5 minutes now. That's around 300 seconds. So that would have been like a stack of paper about this big, already generated just since I started speaking. That's for everything, for your residency permits, for your health certificates, for your rent, for your mortgage, for when you need to pay a bill, when you put your kids in school, or change the schools, when you start a business, or change your business, when you sign up for the internet, the phone, you register your car, you get electricity. All this stuff just generates reams and reams and reams and reams of paperwork. And of course, that comes at a cost. And we sat down and did the math around this stuff. And I think these are probably conservative numbers. We wanted to be credible as we were exploring the economic and social implications of this. So we really lowballed our estimates here. We estimated that the economy in Dubai loses around 25 million hours a year just on paperwork. 25 million hours. That equates to God knows how many people's lives. And just the amount of distance traveled to go from your home to Office A, to Office B, to Warehouse A, Warehouse B, equates to 111 million kilometers. That's the same distance, just for perspective, of going from here to Mars and back twice. Every year, we drive that much. So that actually releases almost 150 million tons of CO2. So there's just a vast amount of activity spent processing duplicated paperwork here in Dubai alone. And Dubai actually rates very high on e-government and on government services compared to certainly the region and many other leading governments around the world. And thanks to the work of Dr. Aisha and her team, that's improving quite rapidly. So what do you do with a problem like this, right? You have a massive problem where you have lots of paperwork and databases and stuff. The traditional 20th century approach is just put it all in one giant database, right? In a centralized server. And this actually makes a lot of sense because it's very safe. You have someone who's a trusted authority who has total access to that and can control who has access, what goes in, what goes out, deals with data standards, data quality, all these sorts of things. So it's safe, it's secure, and it's accurate. But it's also really, really, really hard, especially in fast-moving environments, right? There's my days of computer programming are thankfully long gone behind me, but I do remember as a graduate student having to hack away at database schemas and connecting this little variable name to that little variable name. And these are for simple things around my PhD research. But there's all sorts of approaches to database management which are actually extremely difficult to manage, right? You have to make sure all of the variables have the same name, they all link up to each other appropriately, and that's doable when you're in one organization. But when you're in a government and you might have one version of software, you might have a different version of the software, you might have a different standard, you might have a different standard, you might be on a different release date, they might be on a different release date, you might disagree that that's important with this person. It becomes a tremendous political and maintenance challenge to maintain. So it all costs, time, effort, and money. So ideally, you'd want more of a decentralized approach to this. So instead of having one giant computer in the middle with one giant authority to manage who spends lives processing this, you'd be able to distribute that in a way which didn't have a central server and got away with all the middlemen, and anyone could just get the information they needed, sharing on a sort of peer-to-peer basis. The problem with that is, to date, it's just totally insecure. And it's extremely hard to coordinate. If you think it's difficult to get one ministry to talk to the other when they both have bosses who can talk to each other, how do you get someone who doesn't even necessarily speak your language and you don't have a boss with them to coordinate your data sharing practice? And it's really easy to fake. So to date, the only solution which we've had to manage these kinds of systems is through a large-scale centralized server, right? Enter the blockchain. I am not going to get in any level of technical detail here whatsoever. You have people far more experienced and talented and qualified for that than I am, who are going to get into that as the day gets deeper into detail. But the thing which is important for us in government to kind of understand is that blockchain is a safe and secure way of sharing data without this central system. So let me give you an example. This is an example from the finance world. Let's say you bought me lunch. So I owed you 50 dirhams. So if we're in the same room, I can just give you 50 dirhams. I can give you 50 dirhams cash. No problem. It's easy, right? But what happens if, for example, yesterday I had to take a surprise trip out of the country. So I'm out of the country. I'm not near. I can't give you the physical money. Well, that's really what banks are for. So I have my money in my account. And if we're in the same bank, then it's just going to transfer into your account. That's easy. That's an electronic transaction. But if we don't have the same bank, then there needs to be a third bank in between, often what's called a clearinghouse or a settlement bank. This is particularly true when you're dealing internationally. So there's a third bank in the mix, which basically just makes sure that all of the accounts balance between the two. This approach is exactly like the centralized database approach. In fact, it is a centralized database. It all feeds up into one, ultimately, central bank, right? Ultimately to the federal level, so all the accounts balance. But it costs a lot, and there's a lot of waste. With blockchain offers the potential to simply email you 50 dirhams worth of value, equivalent, right? I can simply say, boop, I've got an address, you've got an address, I send you that value. It's what's called cryptographically signed, which means I can't fake it and you can't fake it. Right? No one else can intercept it, so that solves the safety component of it. It's mathematically impossible until we get quantum computers, which may be in the next decade or so, to break this cryptography. And the key thing here is that transaction is publicly logged. So what that means is there's some information associated with it, the time of that transaction, when it was transferred, how much was it, who sent it to whom, et cetera. And that stuff, that is not, that's okay if that's shared, because that's just the public distribution information. It's not like there's anything particularly sensitive in that. And what you post publicly depends on what your values are, right? So the idea is then everybody has a copy of that transaction. And this means it's impossible to fake. Well, it's very, 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 very difficult to fake. So that means you don't have to have a central bank. You don't have to have a central server. I don't mean the central bank in the legislative perspective. I mean in the sort of clearance perspective. And what that lets you do is, right, that solves this challenge. It's very safe because of the cryptography involved and the public posting of any transaction. Everyone can see that I sent my 50 dirhams to you, and if you say you didn't get it, anyone can check. Actually, you did get that, right? It's very secure due to the cryptographic layering involved, And because you don't have all this tremendous amount of overhead associated with maintaining central systems, it's very cheap, right? So there are some estimates that banks today, global banks, spend between 30 to 40% of their entire operating costs on KYC, so know your customer and anti-money laundering, compliance. That's probably, again, underestimated. So 40% of your entire costs come in just maintaining something like that. So what happens if you are a business and suddenly 40% of your cost disappears? Well, great. You have more money for investment. You have more money for innovation. You have more money to pay back your shareholders, et cetera. The other important part here is this word disintermediation or unbundling. This was a big word in the late 2000s around when the internet was really kind of starting to transform the economy. The idea is you no longer need a middleman. You no longer need a middleman, right? That's kind of important because if you're, say, for example, a payments processor or a bank, right, or a government department who functions to stamp documents from one to the other, you really don't need to do what you're doing anymore. And I think that's actually a good thing because that unlocks a tremendous amount of human potential, a tremendous amount of economic value and creativity to focus on the really important issues facing us that aren't just stamping one document and checking another document's list. It's about trying to understand and develop new business models and new social contracts and new policy ideas to help us transition through this really rocky next decade that we're facing that really fundamentally could destroy all that we know and love, right? But could also unlock a huge new generation of opportunity and new amazing things. So this isn't just true for value for actual money, right? But that's true for any information asset. Stocks, leases, medical records, your identity itself, your school records, who owns what. Anything can be an information asset that you can transfer and exchange. So that means that all of the bureaucracy associated with government transactions can suddenly become much faster, much more secure, much less expensive, and much more available for anyone to do anything. That's why we call this the blockchain is the internet of transactions. And that's ultimately why there's billions of dollars being invested into this. The market value is increasing at a significant rate. There's hundreds of companies exploring this various aspects of this space. Because it's really, as Mo was saying earlier, it's sort of like Columbus just landing on the east coast of America. Suddenly we've discovered this extraordinary new way of doing things. And the transformative potential is becoming clear to the world. And there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to pour into there. So we recently announced with Her Excellency this very ambitious, in fact, the world's most ambitious blockchain strategy. I think it might actually be the only blockchain strategy. I mean, I've seen some policy papers and some advisory work here and there. I mean, maybe some of you guys from Consensus can check this. But I actually think it's the only official government policy focused on blockchain development. Is that more or less true? I mean, so that, yeah, okay, great. That wasn't a call for applause, but I think it is a big deal, right? Not only is it a big deal that a government is actually stepping deeply into this uncertain but highly potentially profitable area that's going to transform our lives and enable all sorts of new exciting opportunities, solving many problems but opening up new opportunities, but actually it's doing it in a deeply committed way. This isn't just like we're going to maybe allow a transaction from one bank to the other. Right? This is like, we're going to try and maybe in 2018 or 2020 make a legislation on it. Is this an asset or is this a currency? Right? This is 100% of all those 100 million documents, which I mentioned earlier, will be on the blockchain, not in 2030, not in 2025, but in 2020. That's basically tomorrow. Right? That's a really, really big deal. So I just want to spend some time breaking this down with you to help you as the first people to actually really get into depth around this publicly about what that means and how that might work. So let's take this rental contract agreement. As I mentioned, I've got all of these documents from different sources. I've got to get different attestations, take duplicate versions everywhere, wasting my time, taking time off of work, et cetera. Right? Once the blockchain strategy under Dr. Aisha's leadership becomes implemented by 2020, it's going to be a super simple process. There'll be 4 steps, really just 3 steps, but happiness is the final step, so that's important. Right? The first is a trusted source issues a digital document. So instead of me getting my employment certificate as a piece of paper, right, it will be a digital version of that. There might also be a paper version because the rest of the world doesn't quite yet move as fast as Dubai, and it's important that we have that proof in some capacity. But there'll be a digital certificate somewhere. And this then will have a cryptographically secured identity token that's put on a public blockchain. So it might not be my entire passport details. Privacy is extremely important. It might not necessarily say how many kids do I have and when was I born, all these sorts of things. It might only simply be, is Dr. Noah a citizen of the United States or not? Right? A simple yes-no check. So you can determine what kind of information is put on there for public verification. Because at the end of the day, it's not like the bank actually needs to know how much money I'm spending on electricity every month. They just need to know that DIWA, who's an trusted authority, has certified me that saying I live where I live, right? And that the Ajari form is saying that yes, DIWA has certified this as well. So this sort of this mutual web of trust. By putting everything on a government blockchain, it is the trusted authority. So government is saying, I'm issuing this. I'm a sovereign authority, and I'm saying Noah is who Noah says he is. Right? Noah lives where Noah says he lives. And so all the different government departments, as they're doing their day-to-day jobs, will post versions of this digitally, which anyone within the government, and indeed entrusted third parties, would be able to check. So simple verify. So instead of needing all of these copies of the same document, they can just simply check the database, bing, yep, okay, Noah is who he says he is. So once all that goes on the blockchain, any government and any partner can check that instantly, which means all of those hundreds of thousands of kilometers driven, all of those millions of hours wasted, all the billions of dirhams of frustration and effort lost will suddenly evaporate, right? Which, in my opinion, is a much happier outcome. This really is the purpose of trying to use this technology to not only solve problems, but actually improve people's lives. Now that's for official government-issued documents. What happens when you, let's say in my case, MIT is not a UAE government department, right? So the idea is that then we will have a partnership network where I bring my document for approval. I might be able to take a picture of this on my phone. I might scan this. There's sort of a draft repository where unverified documents will be stored. And then I take that to a service center. There's many exciting plans we have in mind for where these service centers are. We'll share more of that soon. But basically, anywhere where you're able to top up your phone or buy credit or do any of these sorts of things, you'll be able to go. And essentially, this trusted service center will act as the equivalent of a notary public. They'll check your documents. They will assume the legal liability and any of the risks associated with verifying that as a real or a fake document, right? And then as soon as that is then checked, it goes into the secure blockchain and is done, right? So you only ever have to scan and get your documents certified once. Instead of having to go to 35 different places, you'll be able to go to one place that's conveniently located, dozens of them in your neighborhood. It'll be a quick, easy, efficient process, and then you're right on the blockchain. And then anything you ever have to do around identity verification, around document management, around anything associated with starting a new business, renting a new place, changing jobs, sponsoring visas, all that stuff can automatically be done basically instantly on the blockchain. That's really exciting. This is what an average government department service center looks like today. This particular department shall remain nameless because it's actually one of the better performing ones. I just happened to be there recently. And all of these guys spend all of their day stamping documents, right? All of these people, there are these intermediaries right now where there's things. I remember I was stunned when I moved to Dubai. There's things called typing centers. I was at the Dubai courts last week, and there's a guy sitting next to a copy machine, and his job is to copy things for you. It's like, this is the 21st century, right? This guy must have some greater potential to offer humanity than simply taking your piece of paper, putting it on the machine, pressing print, and then giving it back to you, right? This guy has a higher calling in life, and I'm sure you it's not just sitting next to the copy machine in Dubai courts. So all of this activity will go away. Everything that we know about as what we traditionally consider government bureaucracy, which we traditionally consider government offices, all of that human potential, all of the money associated with that, all of the creativity will be liberated to do new, better, more awesome things. And that's great because the world needs new, better, more awesome things, right? So all of this stuff, 25 million hours of lost productivity, 411 million kilometers driven, all that stuff will go away. But more importantly, instead of just the government efficiency part of things, which I just explained, right, this will enable a whole host of new industries to be created around this. Right? And this is really exciting because, as Mo mentioned, there's a giant economy associated with the ability to transact information very quickly and securely. So this gets into the stuff that Ethereum and Consensus are going to talk to you much more about around smart contracting. But my simplistic way of understanding that is essentially like you have a little computer program, which is kind of like a little robot for you. So let's say I have an asset. I have my house. And my house has certain characteristics. How big is it? Where is it? How much money am I asking for it? What kind of terms and conditions am I asking? I want to sell it by this date. I want to sell it to my mom's cousin, whatever that might be. And then there's somebody on the other side of the equation who wants to buy a house. They have money. They're looking for a house. And they're looking for similar things. A house in this neighborhood, roughly this big, between this price range. I have this amount of money. Here's the kind of sales terms I'm interested in. So instead of actually paying a real estate agent to shuffle us around, right, you could simply issue a little robot on the blockchain, which would go out and then say, my seller is searching for that buyer, and then they meet. And it turns out that this person's conditions meet my conditions. It's all checked. You have one meeting, the buyer comes, they check it out. They may or may not want to buy the house, but all the logistics and the legal issues and the paperwork associated with buying a house, all of that is done instantly, right, with a little computer program. So then we agree on the sale, the assets exchange. Suddenly you have the digital lease, I have your money, everybody's happy, right? Now, that's important because that starts to enable what we call platform effects. So on top of that, if that becomes a digital ecosystem, well, suddenly then I might then sign up for or lease that information to moving companies. It might automatically trigger a series of inquiries by different moving companies. You just bought a house. We know, would you like us to move for you? Great, and then you can bid on your moving services. Furniture sales, school registration, finding a local clinic, all of the logistics around trying to move house, all of that stuff can be basically effortless and frictionless at that point. It will all pop up immediately, and you can say, great, okay, here's 3 schools here. These are the ones my children are eligible for. I'll make an appointment to go visit this one tomorrow, instead of having to do the research online and find out what's available and who's there and all the rankings and all that sorts of stuff. So this is important because it's going to create a tremendous amount of industrial entrepreneurial growth. The other one, which is also really, really important, is an international leadership component, and this is what is part of His Highness's vision, right? Dubai as has the opportunity to experiment with these sorts of 21st century solutions to these grand challenges. But the point is not just only to make Dubai a better place, right? Not only to make the people who happen to be lucky to live here and work here happier and more healthy, right? It's to offer those benefits to the larger region and to the world. So once we have a publicly trusted blockchain, we can extend that first to our trusted sovereign partners where we already have relationships with and invite them to participate on our blockchain or vice versa, right? And then to perhaps other third parties going through a more secure process, which means if you're ever coming to Dubai, for example, the Expo, or for any large event, all of the paperwork associated with visas, associated with your plane tickets, associated with your travel details, associated with what kind of mobile phones you can get, and if you can drive or not, all of that stuff can be dealt with automatically. So your experience of coming to Dubai, of visiting Dubai, of choosing to work here or stay here or go or not, all of the friction of that is completely removed as well. So that means the visitor experience for mega events in the near future is going to be extraordinarily easy and seamless. It also means it's a lot safer and more secure, right? Now, I mentioned that banks are investing hundreds of millions of dollars into this KYC problem, know your customer problem. Why? Because if they end up loaning money to the wrong person or processing the wrong person's money, they're subject to billions of dollars in fines, right? Anti-money laundering, et cetera. But actually, the ultimate KYC authority is the state, right? Ultimately, that's your fundamental identity is your passport, right? Your proof of identity is your passport. So this is saying the sovereign state is going to step forward to create a voluntary international KYC program that is shared between key partners that ultimately, if it works, we would open to everyone in the world. So suddenly, all the sorts of issues around transnational crime, around terrorism, around border control, that suddenly opens up a brand new world of more exciting opportunities and more secure worlds, right? So this is extremely important as you start to look at the longer-term strategic impacts of what this strategy means. So I just want to say, right, often it's important, there's a lot of buzz around blockchain right now. It's quite a fair question to ask, okay, blockchain, maybe I think I understand it, but really kind of who cares? What I want to try to emphasize with you here is that we care, right? The government of Dubai cares for these exact reasons, right? We think this is a fundamentally transformative technology. Often the comparison is that blockchain is going to be bigger than the internet. I think that's probably, again, underselling the potential. And we want to try to explore the benefits and potentials of that with you guys, our partners, as rapidly and effectively as possible so that we can be among the first to actually realize the benefits and share those with the rest of the world. So thank you guys very much.